QB chasing.
G'day, listeners, and welcome back to another very special episode of the Matter Mentality Podcast. We talk all things training, nutrition, and psychology to maximize your performance. Today, I'm joined by another very, very special guest and what I would now call friend from across the pond yet again. Brendan Dacruz. Now, Brendan, just like myself, is an online nutrition coach, physique coach, accredited nutritionist, internationally published fitness model, and national level NPC competitor. He has worked with thousands of clients in the fitness, body composition, and health space. And today we're going to be jumping into a few deep topics, bouncing off the conversation that we had previously only a few weeks ago now, by the time this comes out. It was a very deep, real chat that I think allowed us to connect on a different level that perhaps other conversations might not get to. And it's something that I find that is shared with those who struggle and go through adversity and hardship. And it leads to very real connections and genuine understanding and appreciation of why we do what we do. And that's where I wanted to start today. But before that, I want to welcome and say a big thank you to Brendan for jumping on, brother. How are we doing this morning or slash afternoon for yourself?
Ben, I'm doing incredible, my friend. I'm so glad that we were able to arrange this in our busy schedules and we're able to bounce off of the energy and the connection that we had on my podcast, the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast, and parlay it into today's conversation. So, dude, I'm blessed to be here. I'm very appreciative for your time and then also for your friendship. And I'm looking forward to diving into whatever, realms or deep rabbit holes that you want to get into.
It's one thing, just a brief conversation for listeners. It's one thing as a coach and a podcaster, someone who likes to have conversations where we kind of start chats and it might be we intend to go this way, and we have like an outline of what we want to cover and what might be included, but there's something to be said for those conversations that go beyond the sets and reps. And as I just sort of touched on off air, we've both had those. We've both had more than enough of the sets and rep conversations. We've had the blessed opportunities to be on podcasts to do that. And I love talking about ways to help people change through sets and reps, programming schemes, nutrition strategies, whatever it might be, lifestyle factors. But when you get to have a conversation where you begin to understand someone else's life experiences that are similar to yourself, as deep as yours, that led to kind of why you do what you do, it's another level of connection that you don't always get. And I know we sort of touched on that briefly at the end of our last chat. It's one thing that's made social media so good and the internet so powerful and useful is that we might not even know other people like ourselves in our immediate circles or even in our demographic or our geography. But to have this capability where we can have these conversations, I think makes it a powerful tool beyond just watching reels and TikTok and YouTube videos. It helps build genuine conversation, understanding that even listeners now get to probably feel a part of, like, oh, these coaches aren't just in it to look good in the gym and take their shirt off and help people get lean. There's more to it for us from hearing that conversation, right?
Absolutely.
So, man, I want to jump in and touch on, I listened to a couple of your episodes and things that you shared on your background as well. And from the stuff that we touched on previously, I wanted to dig into the struggles and adversity that you've been through. And I know there's several. I want to open that up to let you kind of dive into it. But this is going back to, I know that in early conversation you talked about the method that you use even in nutritional strategies, the model that you have come up with, the framework, going back to things like your own body image issues, your own weight gain issues and fat loss issues, your own diet struggles, but then also things like adversity that we covered in our last conversation with myself, such as things like loss of family, back injuries and things like that. How much of that, and feel free to expand on all of those where you can, how much of that led to why you've served 1,000 people or over thousands of people? What, it's one thing just want to get people lean. I just want to be a gym coach or a PT or a fitness coach, but it's one thing for us at that level then to feel that deeper pulling or calling towards doing something this kind of significant. One-to-one person might not feel, grandiose to many people, but it's the one-to-ones that make the big impact. And then that, scaffolds on to other people. But how did that shape your involvement in this industry and kind of how you got started?
Yeah, so if I can give you just a little background story as to how I got into like my own personal journey
Please.
into nutrition, into training, this was the impetus for everything. So my personal journey didn't start off as many would expect. I essentially got into nutrition, into training, into supplementation, into this nuanced aspects of digging into physiology, really out of necessity and in an effort to restore my health, my performance. Because I had a love of sport growing up. I was very involved. I was a three-sport athlete. And I really was in competitive sports that had a weight control aspect to them. So I grew up training in martial arts. I had multiple black belts. I did competitive Muay Thai, and I did competitive Wateroo and Taekwondo and different, disciplines essentially. And then I was also very active in distance running essentially. So cross country and track initially. Then I got into soccer. I eventually got into football. But really early on, my foundation was very weight control and very output based. And really, what it came down to was I was in the type of sporting environment where everything was about being lighter, being leaner, being
Mhm.
having better economy in terms of movement. So even at the point of getting out of grade school and into middle school, I already had coaches in my life, both from a school perspective, but then outside of school, that were very focused around my weight, about weight control. So I was learning about tracking my nutritional intake and all these things very early on in life. I'll tell you, I fully was tracking by 12 years old, like with the books. And now, mind you, this is well over 20 years ago. So there's no MyFitnessPal apps. There eventually, once I got into high school, there was something called MyFitDay PC, which meant you had to do it on a personal computer. But I was doing this in food logs, in calorie counting books. And here's the thing, I am the type of individual that I have obsessive tendencies.
Mhm.
So I took everything on and I soaked it up like a sponge. And eventually, what ended up happening was I developed what's referred to now as relative energy deficiency in sport. Now, the
Right.
issue at that time is this is 2003, 2004. That term and that concept and its application to men did not exist because the International Olympic Committee did not term that and actually include men into the categorization of that syndrome until 2014. It was actually the IOC coined that in 2014 for the Olympics.
Mhm.
So essentially, what I was, if anyone is not familiar with relative energy deficiency, I essentially was in a chronic state of low energy availability. And this was a mismatch between my energy intake and then my energy expenditure levels. So I was training at a minimum 3 to 4 hours per day. I would be doing, cross country or track, practice for 2 hours plus. And then I would get picked up by my parents and go right into martial arts. And I was teaching classes. I was engaged in my own classes from a black belt perspective. But there was times I started working very early on in life. I was already working in middle school. And so sometimes I would teach 2 or 3 hours of classes and then do my own 2 hours of training. So it was excessive. Now, that may have not been an issue if I was fueling myself properly.
Mhm.
However, I wasn't. I was constantly restricting myself based on the advice and the guidance that I was receiving. And I'm very impressionable. This is going from the ages of 8 to the time I was 13 or 14. I was very impressionable at that point. So anything that they told me to do, I remember I had a list on my refrigerator for things I could not eat, including condiments. Like these were, it was taken to an extreme just based off the information that I was receiving. So what ended up happening was when I entered high school, I was in this pattern where I was, a varsity athlete, but I was constantly getting injured, constantly getting sick, and I had a really suppressed immune system. And so my parents took me to all different types of physicians and specialists, and we started seeing micronutrient deficiencies. I had hypogonadism, at 14 years old, my hormone levels were not, in base. And at that time, there was the term the female athlete triad, which essentially refers to disordered eating behaviors, suppressed, reproductive cycle, so disrupted menstrual cycles, and then also low energy availability. They did not have that, or they did not realize that that could affect men. And
Mhm.
so, really, what ended up happening was I spent a year away from sports, and during that time, all I focused on, I took all the time that I was training and I focused it onto rehabbing my body and essentially getting into resistance training and strengthening my body. And during that time, I was very fortunate. I thank God every day about this. I ended up at a PT clinic and it was run by an individual, one who was a performance nutritionist and a bodybuilder, and the other who was a power lifter. And they not only taught me how to train to rebuild my body, but they also stressed the importance of nutrition and really taught me the benefits of properly fueling myself. Because up until that time, I was in what I refer to as a mindset of restriction and subtraction. Everything was about
Yep.
removing. And I got into a state of abundance and addition. So as I continued to train and improve my nutrition, I physically saw the benefits that it had on my physiology, on my biofeedback, on my lab work, on performance, body composition. And honestly, I was hooked. So that is really the impetus that kicked off a 20 plus year pursuit of trying to learn everything I can about nutrition, training, supplementation, blood work, physiology to help others do the same. Now, at that same time, this is something I very rarely discuss, but I had a father that was terminally ill. And
Hmm.
initially it wasn't terminal illness, but I will say I was 8 years old and I went to, there's something in the States called Bring Your Child to Work Day. And my father was a supervisor and we were on, I believe, the 10th floor. So we were way up on like a high res essentially in terms of the building that he oversaw. And he had a heart attack in front of me. And at that time, I did not know what was going on, but it was due to poor lifestyle habits, unmanaged type 2 diabetes. He started developing cardiovascular disease. Eventually, he received a terminal illness diagnosis when I was already out of college and I was in my mid 20s. And he was given 6 months to live. Now, fortunately, going all the way back to 8 years old, it really caused me to look because I would go to all his appointments with him. I was a very curious individual. And I really wanted to know, and at that time I couldn't have turned it in this fashion, but I wanted to know what was the driving, what was the root cause of this disease that he was
Hmm.
experiencing in terms of type 2 diabetes as well as cardiovascular disease. And so, just for a little background, my father not only had a heart attack, he had open heart surgery. He had a third of his heart removed. He had two triple bypasses. He had the gamut of things. And as I continued to go into these medical evaluations, and the real big caveat here is my aunt actually is a dean at a medical school for 20 plus years. So actually, I looked into pursuing medicine. I did an internship in medicine when I was in college. I got very innately interested in that. But throughout the process of eventually taking my father all these appointments, going to be his caretaker and be his supporter, I realized early on the importance of nutrition, lifestyle, stress management, because those were the key factors that were driving his disease. And so it really left an impressionable mark on me at that time. So I really looked at, especially once I got out of that state of relative energy deficiency, I looked at nutrition as a way to fuel my body properly and also enhance my metabolic health. So I was already tracking blood glucose at like 13 or 14 years old. I was very into metrics, and I will say that was a double-edged sword because I do have obsessive tendencies that I've done much counseling on, and that was one of the reasons I stepped away from bodybuilding in and of itself. But I will tell you that if anyone is familiar with the type of content or the podcast or the information I put out, they'll see that I'm extremely passionate about things. And I will tell you that pain is what really caused me to develop a passion for this because I saw so much suffering as a young man, a child essentially, and
Hmm.
throughout my adolescence and constantly being in a state, to be honest with you, a state of anxiety, a state of fear that I was going to lose my parents because both my parents were sick. My mother, suffered with cancer later on. It was such a state of fear that I was very into health and whatever I could do for preventative. Instead of being reactive, I
Hmm.
wanted to be proactive. And so it kind of developed in two fashions where even when I was pursuing bodybuilding, which is the pursuit of maximum muscle mass and as little body fat as possible, I had a very health centric viewpoint on this. And that's where it
Yeah.
comes to what I refer to as my health centric coaching model that I really coined that in 2015. And there was a motto that I kept saying to clients that I still say it to this day: a healthy body is a responsive body. And what I
Correct.
mean by
Yes.
that is we cannot force these adaptations to your physiology. We need to coax the body. We need to put it in a state and prime it to be receptive to the inputs of training, nutrition, supplementation, PD use, whatever it may be, so that your body is in a physiological and psychological position for you to actually respond favorably to those inputs instead of trying to force the gas and essentially burn out your car. So it's really taken this all-encompassing process and the experiences I've had previously, and we can also discuss the experiences that we've had that are we share as like a collective unit in terms of I had a pretty drastic accident and rehabbing from that, but really the impetus for all of this was seeing pain, seeing that there were resolutions, there were
Hmm.
solutions that I could essentially institute in my life and implement. And then realizing I never wanted people to go through not only the things that I experienced growing up and into adolescence, but also the things that I witnessed, the poor experiences, the fact that my parents were generally not at any of my sporting events, my graduation. They miss a lot of pivotal moments in my life. And I used to think back upon that. There were so many preventative measures that we could have known.
Yes.
I was the type of person, I was dosing my father with insulin at 12 years old. So I was learning insulin physiology and ridiculous things that, even to this day, they're still applicable. But at that time, I think growing up, I used to think like, not why me, but I always thought, man, this was such a poor, it was almost like a burden to me. And as I got older, especially when I got into college and realized my passion for that, I could do this as a career, because up until that point, I didn't realize if I could do that. When I realized that this could become a career, I realized that what I originally looked at as a burden in my life was the biggest blessing, because it gave me a passion. It gave me a desire and drive to learn more, to serve more, that I was not seeing in those around me, especially in the States.
So many things to touch on, just in the foundation of the origin of the story. That I think one of the biggest things that stands out is what you're describing here in Australia. To me, I call it almost like my tradesman lifestyle, and that is the very particular type of lifestyle we see in your millennial and above kind of age group. Now it's kind of a shifting and seeing a lot more tradesmen get into bodybuilding, health focused careers. They run clubs and things like that, which is great. But it's not the dominant. We still, where we live, there's a lot of construction. It's a very like modernizing area, a lot of high rise going up. And so you'll see tradesmen every morning. I don't, it's not from a position of judgment, but more so from a position of understanding, especially like you said, from our early childhood, even adolescence for me, looking after dad for the years that I did. You get this recognition, it's pattern recognition. You get this identification of strategies and systems that they use. And it's the same generalized sort of profile. And that is you recognize a lot of the time that they'll poor nutrition intake, what's available in the hot box, or what's available at the canteen or the takeaway or the fast food restaurant, or what's down the road to get a hot dog or a burger or chips, fried food, very minimal movement outside. Like it's like, oh, I've got a laborious job, so I don't have to do much. I don't have a sedentary lifestyle. It's like, that's great, but physical trade tool, like being on the tools 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day is great. It's a bit of activity, but then you're straight home to the couch drinking beers or alcohol and takeaway again, or fast food again, or poorly nutrient lacking foods. Very minimal stress management strategies, very minimal resistance training, very minimal resilience building in the body outside of like, I do a hard job. And it's used to rationalize that sort of stagnation. But in my opinion, what I've come to recognize is that stagnation doesn't exist. It's always progression or it's regression. There is very
Yes.
rarely, when I hear someone say like, oh, it's just a maintenance phase, like a stagnation phase. I in maintenance for nutritional strategies, body comp, absolutely. We know that exists. But as time moves on, I rarely find that someone who's stagnating is staying still. You're not staying still, you're losing time and giving up. There's a
Yes.
trade-off to that. And generally what it is you're losing time to get healthier again. You're losing the
Mhm.
time you have available to get better. And one of the things you kind of touched on there was, and what we probably both saw in both of our fathers, is it wasn't just our father, it wasn't just that person. It's a recognition of a lifestyle that could be preventative in many, many, many others. And we see
Absolutely.
particularly, and I'm very curious here on what your thoughts will be around the the perception is that women have a very particular body image standard to live up to and an expectation to live up to, and there's always this pressure on them. But one of the things we don't see is the pressure that's placed on men to get health and fit, and the expectation of them to be healthier and fitter and take care of themselves. Is kind of just like, well, I work a trade job and that's okay. But we've both seen it in both of our fathers, that standard lifestyle of the tradesman, construction, laborious type of person. It's that absence of preventative knowledge that I think ages us quickly, slows us down, and we've both, in the way we saw it, it's almost like that was a trigger or a mechanism or catalyst for us to be like, it's not just this one person that we care about. It's that this person is many people. This avatar or this criteria, this category of person, this profile of person is a profile of many, many, many people. And there are so many that can be preventatively taken care of. But instead we have such a reactive system that is, wait till they're sick and broken and sore and run down, go to the hospital, go to the doctor, go to the clinic, take the medication, repeat the same strategy and process. I've had clients recently, consults recently, where they've had heart attacks only days before our call, but then the doctors are, hey, you can't do anything until I give you approval. Well, I know for a fact the majority of the things that you're going through would stop or at least reduce the risk, but the medical model won't allow you to do that until you get the clarity or the confirmation, the clearance to then, act, which is slowing the progress down even further. But it's the way the reactive model works. And I get that's never dissing, medical models or medical professionals, but it's just so much of it, rather than being preventative, could have probably saved both our fathers' lives another decade. And I think, I'd love to hear a bit more on that for yourself. Do you see that? Is that something you see as well that I found, it's an Australian thing here for sure, but is that in a way where you sort of recognize it's not just my father that I'm seeing this in, it's a broad profile of people that we're seeing this same outcome that, we kind of feel responsible to help now we've identified it?
100%. I will say that at this juncture in my career, my number one audience, or I guess demographic, I don't want to call it a niche or anything like an avatar, but essentially the number one type of clientele that I love working with are high achievers and high performers. And really what I mean by that, I mean, I've gotten guys on the Olympus stage, IFBB, men's physique Olympians. I've worked with many IFBB pros. At one point in my career, say when I started coaching online, because I started coaching in 2010, but I transitioned online fully in 2013. From 2013 to 2020, all you're going to see is physique competitors. And I love that. But as I got deeper into my journey, my father succumbed to his terminal illness at the end of 2019. Really, when I went into 2020, I decided, I'm going to step away from bodybuilding. And that was multifactorial. We can get into that decision later if you would like to. But really, when I got into 2020, we obviously had the pandemic, and that was, I think, a real eye opener for so many people. And I
Hmm.
started realizing that I was relating more to high level executives, corporate CEOs. And the
Yeah.
reason for that was I was coaching that entire time. And I had been an in person PT, but I also was a national sales director and the head of research and development at a very large sports nutrition company. I spent 10 years doing both online coaching and running very, very large companies that I helped scale up a couple hundred percentile. And so I was the person that was burning the candle at both ends. And that comes from just generational wounds. My father was the type of person that overworked himself. He had this machismo type of culture around him that expected that he would be constantly working. And if he wasn't, we have very similar personality types. He was the type of person up 3:30 a.m., 4 o'clock. If anyone knows me for 10 plus years, I've been up at 3 a.m. Very the first person in, the last person out. And that was an expectation that people put on him, but that was a standard that he held himself to. I have the most respect. My father, we didn't have the best of relationships, but the one thing he did give me was a real great work ethic.
Hmm.
However, that was everyone in that circle. And I see that with a lot of the high level, whether it be business owners, entrepreneurs, corporate executives that I work with, it's go, 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 go. And, they're burning the candle at both ends. And eventually they get to a place where they hire me later in life. So the average clientele that I work with now is 40 plus, which is much different than just a few years ago. But the reason it's 40 plus is because many of the people that I'm relating to most are the people that have sacrificed their health in an effort
Yeah.
to push forth their career. And what I really try to get across to them is it doesn't have to be a decision between the two.
Yes.
But how our culture is set up, it is let's be reactive about something. Let's not worry about something. Let's bury our heads in the sand. I can't tell you how many consultations that I've done, or even just client intakes that I've done, whether it be a high level amateur competitor or an IFBB pro, they haven't gotten blood work in a year plus. And the same thing could be said about someone in the general population that is a high level CEO or, a corporate executive. It's very interesting to me because they would not think twice to hire an accountant. They would not think twice to have a CPA. When it comes to financial or professional decisions, they have a full team on board. And oftentimes I have to make analogies to show them that they need help with their health and their physique progression because they are doing themselves a disservice and they're also limiting their capacity for longevity in the career that they do,
Hmm.
longevity within their family, and then also cognitive capacity, decision making, executive functioning, focus, attention, memory consolidation. There's so many aspects that they're missing out on. So I think that seeing this, it's very common. I will say, I work with a large percentage of women at this point in my career, and I have to also acknowledge the differences, the dimorphic or sexual dimorphic differences between the two, because men do have an immense pressure from a financial stability and security perspective of being head of household. I completely understand that. I get that. And I've
Hmm.
worked with hundreds of men in that position. So I understand where they're grinding themselves to the axe. But women also have unique, first of all, a very unique physiology and response to stress, but they also are
Hmm.
generally carrying more stress, more trauma, and more emotional burden than men are. If I was to make a broad-based generalization. So I think a lot of people are kind of burying their heads in the sand, putting their physique goals and their health progression on hold, thinking I will get to that later when I have time. And there is no time. There is no perfect time. You need to be actively working on this. The greatest thing I try to get across to many people is two things. Self-development is an evolution and it's a process you can continually work on. You can get 1% better at one thing within your life each and every day. It doesn't have to be the same thing. So it doesn't have to be linear progression, but you can continually work on something. The other thing is that just as, I came from a meathead background with competing and with working with bodybuilders, but I really try to get the concept when I teach progressive overload or increasing a stimulus over time to induce that you are now stronger as a result of the training you've done previously. That is an expression of the strength and the muscular development that you have gained through the process of stimulative training. That applies to everything. You can progressively
Correct.
overload your training, your nutrition, your health.
You just cut off there. Yeah.
Ben,
And
what I
sorry, there you go.
so what I was getting to was I really try to teach people about the concept of progressive overload and how we are looking at inducing a stimulus that is going to cause an adaptation, which eventually will yield improvements in performance. That is an adaptation of the previous training you've done, and it's proof that it's been stimulative. The prior training sessions have yielded. It's not that you chase progressive overload to get stronger and bigger. It's that you've gotten bigger and you've attained better neurological and morphological adaptations that allow you to express greater strength progression. Now, a lot of times I like to analogize things and I will tell them we're looking at progressive overload not just in the gym. We're looking at it from a nutritional compliance and nutrient density perspective. We're looking at it from a professional standpoint. We're looking at it from your relationships and your mental health and your emotional
Yes.
stability, your spirituality. There's so many aspects of life that we can progressively overload. We should be moving in the same direction in all aspects, including our health. So a lot of times I find that a lot of the conversations that I have, people want to choose between two things. They say, "Oh, right now, I'm chasing the next business, or I'm scaling up. I work with a lot of coaches, so I'm scaling up my coaching business. I got to put my physique on hold." And I said, "Listen, it's not that you have to be at your peak physique or chasing the stage while you're running your business or expanding your business. But if you were to tell me that you're just going to take the foot off the gas and leave yourself in quote unquote maintenance, which really is regression, you are putting yourself in a disadvantageous position because you're not allowing yourself to pour into your own cup, which is going to limit how much you can pour into the cups of others. So this needs to be a transformative process of personal development, physique, progression, and also health optimization."
What I love about everything you've just described is so aligned with how we approach coaching. And the funny part is there's so much behind it that I think because of the alignment of experience we've had that shaped a very similar model. And that is you can hear the empathy, you can hear the understanding, you can hear the emotionality to why you look at it as a holistic lens. And it's something that we take great pride in as well. As when people come on a consult or a call to sign up to coaching, they end up leaving with a lot more than they realize. They think they're coming into a conversation about sets and reps, and they think they're going to talk about like, oh, what's my training program going to look like, and what's my nutrition. That's like secondary in my consultations. That's tertiary in my consultations. Really, by the time we get to like pre-screen forms and things like that, a lot of it, so much more of it is about who you are as a person. What is your social circles like? What's your environment's like? What's your work stress like? What are you doing for careers? Are you happy in your job? Do you have a success criteria? Do you have a schedule? Do you have emotional stability? Do you have these things that you do for downtime that you enjoy that allow to prescribe parasympathetic dial tone and down regulation? Because we've seen it, and I can recognize in the way you're describing it that you've seen the similar things that I have, where we've looked at what happens when you don't have this stuff. We look at what happens when your entire identity is encompassing purely work ethic. And don't get me wrong, I love, just like I love work. I Working to me is the goal. It's not getting to the outcome. It's like, to me, that is the job. The work is the job, and I love it. But at the same time, when you see in someone who's purely a physical, laborious job type career, and it's go, 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 and it's like, I've got to do 12, 16-hour days, I've got to do this, the demand on the body starts to add up. You can see that in the model that you're shaping and the way you've built it out, it's taking all of those perspectives and those different, experiences and circumstances and understandings, especially through your father, especially through your mother. Like, it helps shape what built your foundations and your framework. And not to say it's, you're trying to cure cancers or you're trying to prevent heart attacks, but you see it's a very similar model to myself, where you recognize what happens when you don't have a stress reduction process, when you don't have nutritional adherence, when you don't have awareness. The long-term additions, a long-term equation that starts to add up, that outcome is terminal. That outcome is early chronic death. It is these preventative outcomes that we can look at. And like you said, it's very similar to me. I love my physique competitors. I push them to the utmost degree. But what I get more kick out of a lot of the time is when I see someone change their entire life, and suddenly they're like, "Oh, I've got that promotion at work. Now we're looking for a house, and now I'm getting married." And to me, I'm like, "Man, you came to me barely struggling to get out of bed, to find a girlfriend, to go to the gym 3 days a week." It's this holistic, encompassing model that life should be progressive in all areas because of physique development. And I know we spoke about it on our last podcast, but I just want to double touch on that because I think it's so important that we need to look at the idea that physique development is more of the catalyst to life development and self-development than it's just for vanity and abs. Like that, if I get you a six pack, great. If I get you a six pack and you go broke and you've lost your job and ruined your relationship, I have failed. And I can hear in your language, you have a very similar approach and philosophy to how we look at health and physique development. It's more of a catalyst for lifestyle change and life development than it is for just, hey, I want to photo shoot and get shredded. To me, and I would love to hear, how much you've seen this as well, but oftentimes when I get someone focusing on the process of life development through the physical change, the byproduct of the physique outcome is better anyway.
100%. So I will say that I am a true believer in the fact that if you can transform and change your physique, you can change your life. And oftentimes it's almost a domino effect. So I will have someone that has very large goals, lofty goals, but we start with one and we look at it from a hierarchical perspective, and it's going to be their primary goal. And their primary goal is to recomposition. So to lose fat and build muscle. So we're just considering a physique goal, but then they want to build confidence. I always think about, I'm thinking about today because it's Wednesday. I have a client named Jason. When he first came to me, was working what I would consider like a remedial job. It wasn't his passion. This was a job to him. It was not a career. And he was about 40 to 45 pounds overweight. He was someone that did not feel good. He was in his early 30s, but had horrendous feedback or biofeedback from a stress management perspective to endurance, like even just doing things with his kids. He was labored breathing and just lack of endurance and really feeling a immense amount of fatigue, both physically and mentally, and he just felt like he wasn't capable. And at this point, this guy has four physical therapy clinics around the country and in major cities, so Chicago and Boston and Florida. And we've been working together 3 or 4 years at this point. He has completely redefined who he is, and he has taken on a new identity, but it came from initially transforming his physique, getting him more confident in himself, making him feel better in his skin, developing self-confidence, and then also teaching him that he could go in all in on something and take risks in terms of his physique progression. And it reinforced the fact that he had the skills, the capabilities, and the ability to transform something in his life. And then I remember this conversation because a lot of times with a lot of the entrepreneurs or the corporate executives that I work with, we'll have conversations just because they understand or I understand where they're coming from because I was in a corporate sector where everyone is telling you this is a secure job. I remember no one in my family was, I guess, supportive of the move of me going all in on online coaching. They said, listen, you have a great coaching business on the side, but you have a career that you've built. You're number one in the company. You are the person that's going to take this over, once the CEO resigns. And I had everything lined up, but at the same time, it was no longer fulfilling. And I found that
Yeah.
I needed to invest my energy, my time, and more attention towards coaching. I wanted to go all in on this one path. And for a lot of people in my family or in my close circle, A, they thought that was nuts. B, they thought it was a huge risk. And C, they could not understand why I would gamble on myself. Well, those are the same types of conversations that I have with a client like Jason or many of the clients that I've had that have decided to leave some aspect of their job and then go into an actual career and really pursue something passionate. Then the other thing that I want to hit on that it just strikes me based on what you were saying just previously is really at this point in my career, I have enough transformations. Like, when you're first early on in coaching, you're trying to stack transformations. I get it. When I came into online coaching, I'll tell you the only model anyone had was a 12-week transformation. It was start to finish. There was no post-diet phase. This is 2013. People were skeptical to hire you for 12 weeks, let alone to tell them, hey, I'm going to build out a 1-year periodization program for you.
Yeah.
And we're going to have deficit phases and building phases and restoration phases. That did not exist, even though I was well versed in sports, sports science. So initially it was about transformations. And I remember I got to a certain point in my career and I got flown out to Dallas, Texas, and I was speaking in front of an entire group of coaches. And it was one of the first big presentations that I did. And it was on the concept of energy flux, which is something that I've really pushed to the forth the last 6 years or so. I remember being out in the audience and really trying to get across, thinking what I was going to say to them. And it was supposed to be a little bit of an intro of a background. And I really thought, like, what am I as a coach? Like, am I just this macro guy? No, I'm very nuanced and I like attention to detail oriented and stuff like that. But really, when it comes down to it, I'm not chasing physique transformations. You can look at my page. There are going to be people there that have made physique transformations. But really, what I'm after is life transformations. I want to transform that person's life. If I have to be a conduit through that, just through physique progression, all good and well, because I love this shit. But at the same time, I want to see you improve your relationships. I want to see you improve your psychology. I want to see you improve your confidence. There's so many other aspects that I often will tell a client, especially when they're very myopically focused, which is something that I've dealt with a lot of physique athletes or pros or people that really, they almost rely on this, not only for their degree of value and confidence, but also for their income. So when I've worked with professional athletes, a lot of times they almost entangle the professional aspect of what they do with what they look like. And it's very easy to, and this is something I've dealt with myself. I did professional modeling for many years, so I am guilty of it myself. But at the same time, I really try to get across to anyone that I come into contact with that if the only thing you get out of the gym is a better body, you've done yourself a disservice, because there are
Correct.
so many components of training, of eating well, of fueling yourself, of just really investing into your health as a long-term investment, that it could pay dividends in every single aspect of your life if you let it.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of the biggest, it's one of the biggest gripes I take personally when I see people attack, gym goals, physique development, whether it be bodybuilders, whether it just be performance, lifestyle, whatever. I've got a multitude of such a diverse range of clients, and it starts with something in the gym. Regardless of what that gym aspect is, usually, yeah, they want to improve body composition, but it might be also want to get jacked. I want to get stronger. I want to get performatively better. I want to have more power. And it's something gym related. And a lot of the time you'll hear like, it's just performative. It's just show muscle. It's not real. It's not this, not that. It's like, that's great. That's your perspective. There's trade site strong and then that sort of thing. Like I've been a tradesman. I did that before I had my car accident. I understand the demands of what it takes to be on a site. It is physically demanding. However, the funny part is often you get stronger on site and better at your job because you've started resiliently building your body, spinal extensor work, being able to bend over and stay in spinal flexion for 6, 7 hours a day, being able to load your back more effectively, your posterior chain, being able to lift more effectively with your shoulders. All these things relate to a stronger job site experience, right? And I digress the point. These are the type of people where, we're able to look at them and go, there's so much more you can get from this. There's so much more to be taken from training, that hearing this negative connotation you've ingrained in your head, or this perception that you're projecting that gym is just about vanity metrics and show muscles. The reality is, like, if that's the only reason you look at physical development, you are losing so much and leaving so much on the table for what can be gained in life. And most times there is a whole other outcome besides the body composition or the muscularity development that you can get from training. And a large part of it, a large part of it is something that I've really started to shape differently in how I coach, is identity reconstruction. It's purpose reconstruction. It's when I have fathers and I'm like, I'll have a very early conversation. I'm very extensional in my approach. I don't mind, because I've seen death, I've seen loss, I've seen grief, I've seen suffering. I don't mind going there to extract that out of clients and people that need to understand. I've got fathers that, oh, I'm thinking about, starting training. I'm thinking about this or that, and they're overweight and health concerns through the roof. And I'll just simply hit them, with, if your children grew up to be exactly where you are right now, would you be proud of them? If they grew up to be in the same health position that you are based on the behaviors you have modeled, would you be happy that your your performative life, or the way that you showed up in life, led to that for them? If the answer is no, then unequivocally you need to change now, because you are modeling behaviors and you are living this existence. You are displaying to them behaviors that they will lead to live by. And it is, as a leader, if that is what you say you are in your family and household dynamic, your responsibility to improve, because where you go, they will follow. That is leadership. And it's conversations like that where it's like, that's the light bulb moment. It's like, oh, I don't just need another 12-week challenge. I don't just need another, 10-week block or a 6-week, fat loss, F45 rapid change that's really not going to sustain anything. And it's that identity reconstruction that is built through training, where they start to realize, like, and this, this comes from our check-ins, it comes from our consults, our catch-ups, that I have no doubt you do the exact same thing. Hey, what did you just prove to yourself this week? Oh, I can do something hard. Oh, you had work demands, you had family demands, you had commitments. Did you still show up for yourself? Did you still put the work in? Did you at least manage your minimums and get, your training done, your sleep done, some nutritional intake? Did you show yourself you can still do it? Oh yeah. Well, guess what? Now your kids can see that when stuff is hard, you can still do it. You can still show up for you. You can still and these identity switches, it's not just dads. It's just a very easy example. It's not just dads, but it's people starting to redefine who they are and how they live, whether it be 25, 16. I've got an 18-year-old stepping on stage in about 13 weeks. He's 18 and he's living the life of someone who is, I've seen 30-year-olds less committed than this guy. And to see that in people starting to shift how they view life and what they can do, that's where the real change occurs, where I start to see, hey, the physique is just the vehicle through which we deliver performance development and identity change that leads to long-term success and high performance outcomes. I just find that initial physique exposure is the catalyst vehicle for that. And I think this is a really great segue, because otherwise we'll be sitting here all day, me talking about our life experiences. But it's an important segue to kind of what I thought the initial conversation would be about. And this time of year is a very, statistically speaking, we both know 80% of people drop off their New Year's resolutions. They dropped off what they were going to do. They dropped off these big changes. I personally feel like one of the biggest misconceptions is that New Year is a time for change, that New Year's is this all or nothing approach that's going to lead to drastic, modifications. One of the biggest things that I see left behind, and I would love your approach on this from everything that you've been through and the experiences you've had and how you use that with clients. Before there is actionable change, before there is these drastic changes in, I'm going to quit smoking, quit drinking, I'm going to get a six pack this year, I'm going to drop all this body fat. It is identity change that has to happen to coincide with that physical outcome. And I think a lot of people get that wrong, where they don't actually change how they view themselves, the life that they live, the structure and the environment they have. It's still a former identity, it's still a former profile, while they're trying to make this drastic profile difference. And I think a lot of people leave, to me, a lot of the stuff that gets lost, or a lot of the stuff that leads to the drop off outcome, they haven't changed who they are. They've just tried to add this drastic change in living. I'm going to quit sugar and quit smoking, quit drinking in 4 weeks. When have you ever done that in life? Where else has that ever worked for you? Have you changed who you are as a person enough where that's even possible? No, you're still living the exact same life. You just got to cut out sugar, but still do everything else the same. And to me, and that's where I dive into your model and how you view that around something like a New Year resolution or your New Year goal structure. Is that something you see? Is that something that you align with, or something that you've experienced with clients where that's kind of the approach they take, and you recognize they haven't actually changed themselves, they haven't changed who they are to lead to that drastic change so quickly?
Yes, so I'll tell you, I think my opinions and approach to this have drastically changed over time. I was once someone that, because of my own self-discipline, I used to think that no one needed New Year's resolutions. And I almost looked at it, I don't want to say judgmentally because that's just not my personality, but almost negatively, as
Yep.
in I would always try to get across to clients, you don't need to wait till the new year. And I am still of that belief, because I do not like putting off for a specific date
Yeah.
for what could be approached and acted on now.
Yes.
But I will tell you that now that I work with so many people that are lifestyle clients and in the general population, if there is any impetus or any type of strong urge that will push them forward to actually make a change, I'm going to leverage it. So
Yep.
New Year's resolutions are something that I deal with quite frequently. I deal with often. The difference in my model, I will say that I will have done all my consultations for anyone I'm bringing on in the next year. It's already done by the first week of December. So my entire roster is already built out. And I've done that several years, just because I've generally been on a wait list. So I've been able to have these conversations before the holidays. So
Yep.
I don't want them to set goals as a way to be able to rectify or to
Yep.
essentially act as damage control on what has happened at the right in terms of the Christmas holiday. Because I get a lot of people years ago, when I would take people on right after the holiday, they were making goals in the here and now.
Yep.
Exactly. It was based off of essentially insecurities that they had, frustrations
Yep.
that they had, and the discouraged mindset that they were in from what had transpired over the holiday. So I have a different model to this, but I will tell you that really what I try to get across to people that are interested in embarking on a transformation journey. First of all, we have to check what stage of change that they're in. Are
Mhm.
they actually ready? Are they prepared? Are they ready to take on this new endeavor? But if they are, and we pre-qualify them, I really like to have discussions about, you need to become and act like the person that you want to
Yes.
be. And so we need to do that previously. I want you to take on that identity. I want you to take on that mindset. The person that I want to be does this. They engage in these actions, these behaviors, these habits. They eat a dialed in, nutrient dense diet with 3 to 4 servings of fruit, 4 to 6 servings of veg per day. They have an adequate serving of protein at each meal. They eat mostly whole foods. They don't restrict, anything in particular. They have no dichotomous relationship with food, but they acknowledge the importance of nutrient density and food quality. They get movement on a daily basis. It isn't just this thing where I work a laborer's job, so I don't do movement outside, or I do a little bit of cardio and I sit the rest of the day. This has to be a physical practice that you have. A lot of times I will pair that in habit stack with moving meditation, or some type of stress management strategy where we go out in nature and we move, in terms of like the greenhouse effects, where you're out in nature, you're decreasing salivary
Yes.
cortisol levels. So I just want this to become part of who they are. Training is a non-negotiable. If you want
Mhm.
to transform your physique, there is no negotiation there. We will agree upon a certain amount of days per week that you can commit to based on your lifestyle constraints, your schedule, your responsibilities, and your goals. And then we agree to it. It's almost like a pact that we make between us. I'm going to keep you accountable, but you're going to show up.
Yes.
Even on those days that motivation is low, or you quote unquote feel like you don't have any willpower, it doesn't matter. The person that you want to become does these things consistently and does these things in a manner in which they put intentionality into it. Because it's not, I'm a big believer in how you do anything is how you do everything. So it isn't just about going through the motions. I want you to be intentional. I want you to train with intensity. I want you to eat with purpose. And so it really is about taking on that identity. But oftentimes, what I see in my own practice is that person has to essentially initiate those behaviors, those
Yeah.
habits. They have to go through the habit change, the behavior modification, and that decision making process first to essentially create a buy-in to them, to know almost like a reinforcing factor. Yes, I can do this. And what I really find is oftentimes when it comes to the new year, a lot of people are trying to lean on motivation and they think that motivation is going to bring them through. And we know that's not the case. Motivation is fleeting, meaning it's here today, it's gone tomorrow. So I never want someone to start a goal just based on that motivation, which is actually part of why my process starts elongated out. So someone may be starting the first week of January, but they're already, all their information, all their conversations have already started the first week of December. So it's not like they're ready to jump into this just because of motivation. I'm speaking to them before they even get that pre-anticipatory New Year's motivation. And so I never want that to be the driving force. What I want them to do is actually reverse the process. A lot of people I find look at motivation as the kickstart and they think that motivation is going to yield the results and progress that they're looking for. When in reality, you know, it's not that motivation builds momentum. It's that engaging in the habits, behaviors, and actions that are needed to move you forward, then build momentum because you're seeing progress. And that progress facilitates greater motivation, especially from an intrinsic perspective, where
Yes.
you actually see, I am capable of this. And as long as I keep going, I will keep stacking wins essentially, and my efforts will compound upon each other. So yes, there's a massive component of identity shift, but oftentimes that person may not be able to 100% identify with that person. So it's almost like oftentimes I'll have conversations that I want them to model these characteristics, these actions, these
Yes.
behaviors, these habits, and you will become that person. But I need you to speak it out into the universe first and foremost. So I not only say that from a spiritual perspective, but I also say that I need you to tell your friends and family what you're doing. I need you to engage in conversations where you're letting your loved ones know what is important, what the new version of you is going to be, so that they're supportive, so that they're aware and they're not taken off guard by your habits and behaviors and your shifts. And they also don't try to pressure you in a negative perspective because they're looking at you as who you used to be rather than who you want to become and who you are going to become. So it really does, it's a process of manifestation, but it's really starts with a process of action, because without action and
Yes.
execution, we have nothing.
Yes. And amazingly, the way you've just framed that too is it's important to recognize people. And I want to appreciate there's nothing wrong with New Year's resolutions. Again, like it's they are great tools, and some people will require that little bit of like a mental kick to be the reason why they change. But what's facilitating here is the conversations are happening ahead of time. They're happening at a deeper level. It's not just about, hey, how much fat do you want to lose, or hey, what weight number do you want to get to. It's more about, and this is something I call future predicting, and that is, or future identity creation, is what is that successful person that you want to be in 10 years time doing right now. Like if you were to look in the future and see what that person is doing, what are the exact traits, skills, behaviors, environments, how are they living? Okay, well, instead of waiting 10 years, we can shorten that distance and start now. We can start doing those things and put them into practice. We can start to curate your environments. I wrote an ebook on this about 6 years ago. One of the first pieces of content I put out was understanding your optimal environment is not just go to the gym. It's what does your social circle look like? What does your environment look like at home? What is the food like that you have at home? What does your friendship circle or family circle know about what you're doing? What are you listening to and watching on TV and music? And how is your room or your environment created that's going to facilitate the change or facilitate that or support the outcome you're trying to achieve, which is just by hearing what you described, exactly the same premise where you're looking at it's not just, hey, you've set a huge goal and off you go. We know those are the ones that drop off, right? They're the ones that generally will just yeah, you've got that 3 to 4 weeks, but statistically speaking, you've probably dropped off by now because it's the end of January. We know that you're probably back to square one, and I'll just wait till next year. I'll wait till the next monumental day to start, or the new starting point that will come up in the future, and we'll create that kind of like futuristic deadline or start date. We know that's not going to work. These approaches and how you get people going is a lot more about the entire structural shift than it is, a massive behavior shift. No, I completely agree. Action trumps motivation. Action, actually, if we look at dopamine reinforcement, we look at self-determination, often action when aligned with values and purpose, and we understand, competence, and we look at autonomy, that will reinforce positive behaviors or reinforce and create a positive feedback loop, which then we know dopamine starts to become an anticipatory hormone, not
Yes.
a projection hormone. So we're getting excited about doing the thing as opposed to, I'll feel good when I do the thing. That's how we reinforce it. And that's what, the action creates. That's where I think early buying gets those momentum, those roll-on effects that you're talking about. The problem is for a lot of people is that they don't create the environment and systems and structure to allow that to happen long term. What you've just described is reinforcing from a psychological level, an emotional level, a physiological level, that even an environmental level, as you said, speak to your friends and family. You can support that change, not only those first 4 weeks, but you're going to go into 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 18 weeks, halfway through the year. Suddenly that fat loss has come off. And I think this progresses into the next point of your model, which I really like, is, getting lean is the easy part. It's the sustaining it after the fact that is actually difficult, provided you have these structures and pillars in place. For guys like us and the way we approach the post-dieting phase or the diet after the diet, that's where it becomes, we model how to use that environment you've just built, those character traits you've just built, those systems you've just built to then handle the next phase. And, I agree. A lot of the time that you're talking about here, man, to me, after a few years of doing this, dieting is the easy part. Once you have the systems and the structure and the identity and the mental cues to switch, when I know it's time to diet, it just clicks. It's I this way with my food. I do this now with my life. I do this with my nutrition, my training, my lifestyle factors, my stress management. Oh, it's time to get a bit heavier and put on some muscle mass. Cool. I'm now in this mental cue and I'm now in this framework. Tell me about that, where you look at like that approach you have now, and I've seen you talk about it a few times. I've listened to some of your episodes. That the easy part is getting lean. Once you have that structure set up, as you just described, the thing I like about your model and the way you just described even New Year's resolutions is it doesn't have to be a New Year's resolution. That same approach works at any point of the year to start change, to start working with a coach, to start physique modeling, where it's like it doesn't have to be January 1st, let's get going. It's just that's a time that people like to kick off. But your model of getting lean and getting lean, structured, systemized becomes easy is an any time of the year factor. How do you approach that? Is that something that you found with, you is that something that you see universally across clients? Like once you structure it, it is easy. It's the next part that gets difficult. And then how do you attack that?
Yeah, so I do want to expand upon the comment that I've made on many podcasts, is that I often will say fat loss is not the issue. It's not the hard part. It is fat loss maintenance that is the difficult portion of the process. And that is not to disregard or to minimize the efforts and
Oh,
sometimes
absolutely.
the
Yeah.
gargantuan efforts that people have to put in based on their physiology, based on their behavior, based on, relationship with food, things of that sort. But most people's primary issue is not that they cannot lose fat. In fact, almost everyone that I've met over the last 16 years I've been coaching has lost some amount of fat in their life and have achieved a leaner physique than they had before, and usually than they have currently. So I don't believe that losing fat is the main issue. And that's why I say that it's not the hardest part.
Yes.
What most people are encountering or struggling with is that they've lost fat, but they're unable to maintain that fat loss long term. So when I say that getting lean is the easier part, it is in comparison to maintenance. And really, what it comes down to is many people do not take a systemized approach to fat loss, which is sustainable. And it's not that every single thing that you do within a fat loss phase needs to be sustainable. However, you have you have to model a lot of the same behaviors, habits, and decisions that have allowed you to be successful in fat loss and do that in the post-diet phase. And what a lot of things happen, it's almost like a loss of not only goal, but also people do not relate the same structure that they had in a fat loss
Yeah.
phase that led to success towards a post-diet phase. They think that the work is done and it's,
Yeah.
all bets are off. And really what ends up happening is fat loss gives a lot of people structure. It provides rules for them to follow. It creates urgency. And most importantly, it gives them a carrot to chase. And a lot of people don't look at maintenance as the same thing, because if we really think about it, Fat loss, losing fat oftentimes is an approach-oriented goal. Now, if we are to look at maintenance, meaning what really people think about instead of maintaining all the positive habits, behaviors, the successful things that have allowed me to get to a greater physique than I've had previously, instead of looking at it as a positive thing, that maintenance is also an approach goal because it's something that you still have to actively work towards. They look at it as an avoidance oriented goal. They're looking at it, I don't want to get regained fat. They look at it from a negative bias perspective. And really what that comes into is it creates a scarcity mindset. And really, a lot of times people are not still sustaining the same habits, behaviors, actions, and decisions that they had in a fat loss phase that led them to be successful after. And really what it comes down to is that people look at short-term interventions that are going to lead to rapid progression. I'm not saying that rapid fat loss phases cannot be effective, but if you are
Right.
someone that your actual goal is to lose fat and keep it off, you have to look at the initiating approach that you take. So with a lot of these individuals, I'm looking at reconstructing their entire lifestyle, their approach to training, their approach to nutrition, really making this a fundamental component of their daily lifestyle, making them have routine meals that they eat in a structured manner. They have a daily meal schedule. They're doing these things habitually. So it becomes a part of their lifestyle because a lot of people are in this mindset that they're going to do what's hard for those 12 or 16 weeks, and then they're going to stop. They don't say it like this, but they
Yeah.
essentially stop showing up. And really what it comes down to is fat loss. Yes, it is a phase, but living lean is a lifestyle that you need to integrate. And that's really where it comes to, you don't have to use the same tool. So it's not, you don't have to continue hitting that calorie deficit tool, but you have to find certain interventions to be able to keep yourself in energy balance. So that's really where I speak a lot about a high flux model, which is essentially high energy output paired with high energy intake. And really what I'm trying to do is create essentially a higher energy turnover in the system, meaning that we're getting you out of this metabolically adapted state of being in a deficit because we know that being in an energy deficit and losing fat causes physiological adaptations to your metabolism, to your BMR, to your thermic effective eating, which lowers just because you're eating less. You're seeing a suppression in your BMR because you're a lighter, leaner individual, but also we're seeing the metabolic adaptation component, which is outside of just the pure body mass that you've lost. We're seeing components of your non-exercise activity thermogenesis lowering where you're unconsciously moving less. And then we're also seeing exercise activity thermogenesis decreasing because you are now not having as much force output. You're not lifting as much. And you're every single contraction, we have something called mitochondrial efficiency, which is increased during a deficit, where for every single movement you do, whether it's a bicep curl or step, on the treadmill, you are burning less calories per movement. And so when we get out of that fat loss phase, we have to account for all of these physiological adaptations because for every single goal we have, I always say this to clients, for every gimme, there's a gotcha. And really what all that means is that there are trade-offs in everything in life. If
Yes.
you want to transform your physique by losing a substantial amount of body fat, there are physiological adaptations that your body's going to go through in as a result of energy conservation. So on the way out, instead of just going back to the same habits and behaviors that you had previously that landed you in a body composition you're unhappy with, we have to take some of the fundamental habits and behaviors, the high protein diet, the nutrient dense meals, prioritizing fiber and fruits and vegetables. We take that component and we build upon it. We looked at that initial diet as a skeleton, essentially, and then we add things to it while increasing energy output from movement or from activity or just higher training output. And we really make a model which makes this more sustainable, where we don't just focus on body weight, because a lot of people have a misconception that maintenance equals body weight maintenance. And really, if you look into literature on weight maintenance, it's 2 to 3% from your lowest body weight. But we also have to consider the fact that you do not own your lowest scale weight during a fat loss phase. That is a glycogen depleted, that's a
Yes.
stringy, water lost physique. And so even if you were to restore glycogen, which generally most people have, if you're an average 70 kilogram male, between 4 to 600 grams of muscle glycogen and 80 to 100 grams of liver glycogen. So if we go on the means of that, that's 600 grams of glycogen that you could store. And then for every gram of glycogen stored in muscle, we have 4 grams of water with that. That's 3,000 grams, which is 3 kilograms or 6.6 pounds. So if you go from your most depleted state, we restore you and you won't have any differences in your physiology, which we know that there's a huge inter-individual variability. You can go from your lightest, and we see this with stage competitors because I've peaked many clients, as have you. We see 6, 7, 8 pounds that they increase, no fat gain because they're still in energy balance, but now they're glycogen restored. So we're not talking about the maintenance of your lightest body weight. We're talking about maintenance of your actual body composition, meaning your fat mass. And then we're trying to really dial up the dose or dial things up from a body composition perspective in terms of lean mass gain. So there are many modes to go about this, but really what I try to get across to individuals is that Fat loss is easier because many of you are struggling with maintenance. And really, what it comes down to fundamentally is that you are not using the same structure, the same systems, the same habits, the same behaviors outside of fat loss phases that you are in them. And that is why you're on that
Mhm.
yo yo merry-go-round where you lose weight, you regain it, you lose weight, you regain it. And you really need to look at a more consistent approach instead of taking the shortcut, which allows you to get the most amount of scale weight off in the shortest amount of time, only to be back at square one shortly after finishing that fat loss phase.
I think you've touched on a great concept here, and that is that essentially I see this across fields. It's not even just about weight loss. It's that generally when people have a large goal, whether it be business performance, whether it be relationships, family, whether it be their physique and their health, the large performative goal, the intense goal, the extreme outcome they're trying to achieve, it's all or nothing. They'll go all and they'll hammer it.
Mhm.
That's, I'm doing
Yes.
everything towards it. And then they think that that's the job done, right? They've achieved this thing. And now it's like, that's it. I'm good. That's, I'm going to stay here forever. Though we know realistically, it case that like the way I kind of approach strength training during a deficit phase, usually the strength it takes to build the tissue is roughly the strength it takes to maintain it. Doesn't necessarily mean this need the same amount of volume, but I roughly need you to be at the same level of intensity towards the weight that you are lifting. I don't want to see, a 300 kilogram leg press go down to a 100 kilogram leg press because you're in a deficit. It's the same sort of thing, right? The strength that it takes to achieve that goal, the behaviors, traits, skills it takes to achieve that goal generally have to traverse that to sustain it or at least make it the new level. I look at it as I call it kind of like reinforcing the structure, reinforcing the scaffold. You've essentially leveled up and you've built this new level. We've both had family and we've been in construction and hard work. For people listening, it's an easy way to understand it. You've built the scaffold, you have this new level that you've built, and the foundation's been done, right? You've got that. That's the level you've got to with your goal in that rapid fat loss phase or the fat loss you've achieved. You don't regress back. You don't take the scaffolding away and go, oh, this is now, I go back a few levels. This becomes the baseline and you reinforce with
Yes.
structure and systems. You reinforce that level that you've achieved and say, this is now my new baseline of who I am. So what does that look like? Well, it means these things have to become non-negotiable so that it doesn't require cognitive function. If it becomes non-negotiable, it becomes part of who you are and identity, it doesn't require the same cognitive load to do it. Therefore, it's easier to achieve. There's less friction. Then from that, if you want to go up or down from there, it's easy to level and modify. I want to now push the next layer of fat loss where I want to get, from 10%, which is already hard from 20, I want to get to that 5 to 6, which we know, for me, what I've found is those drastic jumps, well, sorry, those very lower numbers requires more effort, but yields a less
Yes.
response, but it still takes more and more work to get there. So we're going to go from 10 to 6 or 10 to 5. I've now got that platform to scaffold off again. And now I'm going to build new skills to get there. And I'm going to reinforce that, not to stay at 4 or 5% or 3%, but so I know that I can get there. And if I want to go back to it, I just ease off, or I can return there when I want to because I know I have those scaffolded skills now. I've scaffolded. Vygotsky in education models, they teach that there's a Russian developmental psychologist taught this as a educational tool that now the foundation of literature and education is scaffolding. You build the baseline skill, you learn how to do it, you reinforce it, then you push the difficulty again, reinforce it, do it again. It's how we generally adapt skill. It's the same thing when it comes to your fat loss and health and lifestyle. And for both of us, we would have seen this in our fathers, in our parents, in people around us. It's not the act of hard work that you're struggling with. We should have just reinforced that hard work to become a baseline that's sustainable. It's something that you can do. Push, I call it seasons. Push for a season, then learn how to pull back. Push for a season, learn how to pull back. Know what season you're focusing on. Know what, like, whether it be, I use it as a mental model. Is it your work season? Is it your nutrition season? Is it your education season? Is it your sports season? Which one takes priority right now? Let's push that. Then we're going to regress and pull back a little bit. Let's push this one. I'm going to regress, pull back a little bit. You learn how to do that. Everything's sustainable. It's understanding the maintenance level requirements. Though you're not at maintenance, you are able to sustain that high level of output now. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss, as your model describes here quite perfectly, is once you have the systems, the getting lean is easy. We know realistically a
Yes.
deficit with good nutritional density, with good protein intake, good fluid intake, hard training, and decent level of output is pretty easy. It's how you support that after the fact and how you build that into your life, which again, I think is why this is such an important conversation where both of our backgrounds have led to coaching. It's understanding all those experiences we've had and those things we've been through where we realize that it's not the hard work that is the problem. Had you have been able to sustain this and put the systems in play, you'd have been able to then handle the maintenance after the fact or handle the thing that comes next. And that is for most people in the fat loss phases and why we see so many people end up back at the New Year's resolution in 6 to 12 months' time is because they didn't have the long-term perspective in mind. They didn't have the delayed gratification in mind. They have that long-term strategy. They just looked at it as 12 weeks, I'm done. and then straight back to where they were. There was no post diet. There was no post phase plan. There was no post phase strategy. And this to me goes for everything in life, that it's not just that single burst. It's a single burst, and then can you sustain what happens afterwards? It's that burst, sure, in that area of focus. Can you handle what comes next? Can you set it up so you can now sustain some of it, or at least a degree of it, or percentage of it, that you can operate at that level effectively without having to burn yourself out and drain the tank and hate every second of it. You're not supposed to love dieting. You're not supposed to love fat loss, but you're not supposed to hate your life during it where you never want to touch it again. And I think that's what the big difference here in what you just described is, and the way I look at it as myself, is systemization to fat loss as opposed to abuse of fat loss.
100%. I will say another way that I've been able to make this more successful for individuals is I do a pretty comprehensive and extensive intake process when someone first comes to me for coaching. And it's a very honest and open and transparent process. And I'll always let someone know if they're not, whether I'm not the right person for them or they're not the right person for my type of coaching model. But I actually pre-qualify everyone first and foremost. And secondarily, I do not take anyone at this point in my career, and I know this is going to be very off-putting to some in the audience, and by all means, we may not be right for each other, but I do not take anyone that I take on for the first time through a fat loss phase first. Every individual that comes to me for fat loss first goes through a primer phase, and that is the foundation building part of my coaching process. And the reason I say that is because a major component of the health-centric coaching model that I built and that I've reinforced and that I've evolved over the last 11 years is around doing client no harm. And oftentimes people want to rush into a goal without having the proper foundation built. So during that primer phase, the duration will depend on where the person is when they come to me, not only from a physiological perspective, but a psychological perspective, with their relationship with food, with their current nutritional habits and behaviors, their current training approach, as well as output, their movement. There's so many things that I'm looking at. It's an amalgamation of things. However, every person that comes to me with the goal of fat loss is first going to do a pre-fat loss primer phase, because I'm going to make sure that we dial in their foundation. We ensure that their physiology is in a good place, especially from a blood work perspective, because I encounter a lot of women, a lot of men that have dysfunction. And so I first want to fill in those holes, fill in those gaps, both physiologically, but also from a habits and behavior perspective. I don't want someone white knuckling their way through the first few weeks of a fat loss phase only to fail. So we work on building better habits, behaviors, building systems and structure. And from there, they have a greater foundation where there's confidence in both their abilities, but also the likelihood of them succeeding. Because Ben, I'm sure you get this as well. I have so many people that come from a yo-yo dieting background. They've dieted dozens of times over the years, or they've spent years, if not decades, trying over and over again. And they've essentially been in diet purgatory. They restrict themselves for a certain period of time, and it's overly restrictive. And then they just break and they go off the beaten path and they regain what they've lost and then some. And then they go right back into a restriction-based approach again, and it just perpetuates itself. And really what I mean by being in diet purgatory is that they're putting in a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of attention, a lot of mental anguish. However, they're not getting anything in return from an actual adaptation perspective or from an actual body composition improvement perspective. So I try to ensure that people that come to me with the 16 years that I've been doing this don't make the mistakes that I've made or that clients that I worked with early on make. And really, I'm trying to put them in the best position to succeed, so that the only real adjustments we have to make when it comes to fat loss is decreasing energy intake, and that's through modification of both meals, food composition, food sources, and then also maybe dialing up a little bit of activity or cardio or something to increase energy expenditure while we're concomitantly decreasing energy intake. It's not this life shifting or this paradigm shifting process where they got to change their entire lifestyle and think that they have to be perfect in that first week. We've built that foundation. We've set them up for success. We've built that confidence, and we've also built a relationship where I understand their biofeedback. I understand their body's response to different inputs, whether that's from a nutritional intake in terms of total energy intake, or from a nutritional composition perspective, from macronutrients to the actual food sources, to seeing how they respond to different supplementation. We've already essentially have a proven track record. We've had time to dial things in, to titrate things, to be able to make adjustments and build a relationship where there's trust there, that when I say, listen, now we're going to transition to a fat loss phase, I think you're set up for success. They're not going to have these self-limiting beliefs that they had previously, which have caused them to over restrict in the beginning. And then they also, with that same mindset of essentially self-limiting beliefs and self-sabotage, a lot of times what people will do with over-restrict because they're trying to overcompensate from their failures of the past. But when
Yeah.
things get hard, they're also more willing to throw in the towel because all they remember is their previous failures. But when I can go back and say, listen, we took a periodized approach to this. You had an immensely successful primer phase. Yes, there was bumps in the roads and there was some hurdles, but we overcame them. And you were able to stick to the plan and continue to make improvements in your behaviors, your habits, and your body composition. Let's remember the previous successes that you had in our past phase. You can do this in the fat loss phase. Not only is it a more sustainable approach and it's easier for them to implement and actually execute, but when challenges come up, which they always will be, whether they're intended, they're expected or not, there's going to be life challenges that come up. There's going to be kids that get sick or stresses at work or issues with your partner or just illnesses that you encounter. You're going to be more physiologically and psychologically prepared to take those on and keep pushing forward once we get over that roadblock.
And really it just comes down to there what you just described is building confidence and success. And one of the things that when people ask me like they want to work on self-confidence, they want to work on confidence is realistically a degree of confidence is just having a resume of things behind you where you've proven you've done successfully. And a lot of the time, because like you said, they don't scale up or scaffold up the difficulty. They don't adjust the difficulty based on the competence. They just go straight from 0 to 100. And it's this it's this like I've never played a video game before. I'm going to play master level. And then you wonder why you can't get past the first level and you're like, what is happening? Instead of going, as you said here, so easily, and it's something I run for a lot of my clients, is like, let's just build up to 3 to 5 serves of vegetables. You've come from none. Let's build up to 1 to 2 serves of fruit, 3 to 4 liters of water, and get 7 hours of sleep a night. Let's build those first so that when you tell me, hey, I can't handle this next thing, I can say, actually, we have proof of you doing that. And it might not be perfect every single week. It might not be perfect every day. But if 5 out of the 7 days is three fruits, 5 proteins, 4 liters of water, and 7 hours sleep, here's a proof that you have of success more than not. So now when I do the next thing, you're going to say, oh, I can't do that. I can say, well, you've already got the confidence. You just need to recognize that it's confidence. You have, if competence is the baseline measure that you're assessing yourself on, then you have confidence because you've proven competence at doing the thing. And we know in motivational literature, competence is a key part of self-determination. So let's shift that and just take that approach and go, your identity now is less about the negative, less about the restriction, less about the subtraction, and look at it more about, hey, I've done the thing. If the thing is what you're struggling with, but you've had proof of doing it, well, then we just keep leveling up the difficulty until you get confident at it. We don't just go straight from never tracking food to here's your macros, see you later, go off and do your own thing. We're teaching you along the way, but now you have proof when it comes to macros. Hey, now that you want to get to that fat loss number, we've got the skill sets and the experience and the confidence to be able to do that. And that's essentially what you just described is reinforcing confidence in the person early so they've earned the right. I call this, same way when I discuss my clients' PED strategies, when I talk about, training phases, you got to earn the right to use that tool, earn the right to be in that stage or phase or life structure so that you can handle it. And essentially that's what you just realistically described is the first phase is to build confidence to handle what comes next and actually have the body to respond, in terms of sensitivity to inputs and outputs to be in that position to handle it. And I could talk to you for 3 hours and that's I don't want to take all that time because that's what we're going to end up doing it. And I know that that'll happen. But one of the biggest things that I want to get from you right now is what advice would you give to people, whether it's coaches, whether it's to clients listening, but people trying to look at fat loss phases? How do you take your experience, your adversities and struggles, and how do you look at that as it's possible? How do you take that and say, you know what, it can be done? Whether that's to use your struggles to help other people, whether it's to say that your struggles aren't a justifiable reason to quit. How do you take your experiences in the way you've shaped your model and changed thousands of lives? What's the biggest takeaway from that you'll give people listening that they can use and go, oh, that's me, I can use that?
Right. So the biggest piece of advice that I can share, both from my personal experience, my professional experience, having worked with so many people that have had, the biggest thing, and I'm sure, Ben, you can relate to this, the beautiful thing about encountering struggles and having such obstacles and really encountering hardship, pain, loss, grief is that you can relate to other people. And we've been through it ourselves and we can relate to others. So really what I would really like to get across to individuals is if you are someone that has been through hard stuff, do not see that as an impediment to your future progress. Use that as proof, an undeniable proof that you have gotten through every single thing that life has thrown you thus far. And if your goal is physique progression, or it's fat loss, or it's to restore your metabolic health, or it's to get on stage shredded, You have been through so many things that are harder than that. It may seem because it's unfamiliar and we fear the unknown. But once you become familiar with the process that is necessitated or required to get to your goals, you just have to remember that you have an undeniable stack of proof of having been through things previously. And if you can lean on that in the hard times and you have faith in the fact that you have the competency, you have the ability, you have the strength, you have the will, and you have the motivation and determination to get through this, that will allow you to keep pushing forward. Because there was many times, I'll tell you personally, in my own life, especially from a career perspective, I remember getting into this in 2013, and even up until like 20, the first time I had someone on the Olympia stage, it was 2018. And I remember so much ridicule from those at my office because I still had a corporate job that I would go to. And the only time I would take off from work would to fly out to shows that I was prepping pros at and stuff. And there was so much ridicule and essentially judgment placed upon me that I was wasting my time, that, what is an online coach? The industry was not there yet. And I understood that at that time. And those were super hard times, but I always leaned into the fact that I was doing this for no one other than myself, for my clients, the people that I poured into, and the fact that I'd been through so much harder things that I wasn't going to allow the opinions or the judgments or, the external validation that other people were getting or putting upon me, the expectations to essentially change the trajectory of where I wanted to take my life. And I think a lot of times the reason I share that is because I have so many people that I've worked with or I have consultations with that the reason they have not changed is because those in their circle, they fear the
Yeah.
response or the
Yes.
reaction that those in their circle would have. And that is really where we really need to evaluate, are the people in your social circle right for you? And I don't mean right for you who you are right now, but where you're going and who you want to
Yes.
be. And so
Yes.
that's really where it comes down to being very reflective, retrospective, and really sitting with yourself, determining your why, and also having a very, I like doing a lot of vision boards and a lot of exercises to goal set and to really forecast into the future what I want to accomplish. And then I essentially reverse engineer that. So I would advise anyone out there, lean into your struggles. Do not hide from them. Do not think of trauma as something that's an impediment or you're damaged or anything of the sort. These experiences can give you strength, especially in times where you think that you're going to lean into weakness. So first and foremost, that's the first thing. And then secondarily, I'd really advise you, I can say from my own career perspective, I am so immensely fulfilled. I wake up at 3 a.m. every day, which sounds crazy, but I have international clients, so that's why I do that. But I'm fueled by passion in the morning and I go to bed, I look at myself in the mirror and I'm thankful to God that I am satisfied with what I do and knowing the impact that I have on other people. So if you are in a position where you want to make a massive change, whether that is transforming your physique or getting on stage for the first time or doing a photo shoot, or even if you're another coach out there listening to Ben and I, and you want to make the jump to really take this full time and make this your actual profession and your career, do not allow the opinions or the reactions and responses of others to dictate what you do with your life. We have one life, and it's a very short one. And I will tell you from personal experience, and Ben, you know this as well, seeing someone you love, you lose them early on in life, it really causes you to value
Oh yeah.
time and the necessity of using every single moment to the best of your ability and maximizing the moment. We will never get this time back. So if you are someone that you're leaning towards really feeling a drive and a desire to do something, do not hold off because of those around you. That may be the impetus that you need to really reevaluate who you have in your life and realize if it's better to really go into the next chapter of your life by, I don't want to say disassociating, but distancing yourself from those that don't support the next level version of yourself.
I literally put up, it's amazing you said, I literally put a story up yesterday. And it's a conversation I had with one of my youngest competitors recently as he's starting to evolve past, social circles that he's in because he's, headed in such a specific direction. And that is, I said that you are supposed to evolve past your initial circles. You are supposed to, if you have genuine desire towards growth, development, and pursuing a higher task, the people that you initially surround yourself with, a lot of times are primarily due to proximity and environmental structure as opposed to alignment and similarity in values and goals. So a lot of the times you and I use this example last time on one of my stories is it's kind of like playing a role playing game. It's kind of like playing World of Warcraft or whatever game you might play. Your initial area where you start is not where you're supposed to finish. You're not supposed to stay in those initial towns and cities and those circles where it's like the game is to build skills first, it's to build knowledge first, to build adaptations, understanding of how life works, the game works per se. you're supposed to evolve past that. And if you really want to push yourself out there and you really want to chase big goals, you can't limit yourself by the cumulative thoughts and limitations of those that are inside that initial circle, because they are going to see you from where you came from, not from where you're going. And a lot of times, because they don't want more, they're going to look at you as like an outlier, or as Nietzsche refers to it, the Übermensch, which is this desire for a greater evolved person. The herd wants to pull you back in. The herd doesn't want you to evolve because it exposes their limitations and their insecurities. And so it's easier for them to say, hey, don't do that, come back here, because then I have to recognize we came from the same place and I'm doing this and you're going this way. And a lot of the time I say, find good people, as in, like, I have a lot of singular connections. I don't have circles, because circles tend to want to keep you inside a narrative. There's nothing wrong with circles if you have them, but a lot of the time I find initial circles fit in that mold of this is where you are and who you are. I have individual people that I have different types of conversations, interactions with in all across the world now. It's amazing. Find those people, and it might be one or two inside that first circle. But my best mate, godfather of both of his kids, I've known since I was 13. I don't hang around those same people anymore, but I will move mountains to see him. That's where I am with my relationships and social circles. As you said, to expand on that point, you may have to evolve past those initial circles to make that goal possible. That new
Yes.
version of yourself that you want to become may require evolution and disassociation or distance from that initial circle, those circles you're in, because the goals and the way you think has to shift and be bigger than what the collective thought processes of them. And if you don't, you kind of have to be okay with limiting what you see as possible, because they limit what they see as possible.
Yes.
And they may not be on the same wavelength as you and what you're looking at and going, these are my big dreams. This is what I want to achieve. They're going to say, hey, that's a bit weird for us. Like, come back here. And if you want to make that possible, you're going to have to accept, what I've called and seen it many times is the loneliness period. The period
Mhm.
where
Absolutely.
you're not quite the person where you're in those big rooms yet and you have those big friendships or those high leverage friendships, but you're also past or evolving past where you first started. There's a gap in there where you're becoming the person you need to be to fit in that room, but you're not the same person that was in the initial room. And it's lonely, it's isolating, it's restrictive, because there's weekends by yourself studying, upskilling, grading, training, whatever it might be. You have to accept that. And once you get past that initial struggle, suddenly the doors are opening to those new people, to those new friendships. It's exactly how me and you connected, exactly how me and Dr. Mike connected. It's through, we took the leap, and I'll always use our own example of this. Coach Cav has said, hey, you know what? I want you to come speak on stage in America. The business has just started. I've sold my shares, my portfolio down to start the company. I've quit my job because I just wasn't fulfilled in what we're doing anymore. I'd reached max leverage of what I could get out of it. I'm taking this risk. Hey, it's 18 months into this process. Can you come speak on stage and teach me what you know? I think you should be on that stage. Cool. That's a $10,000 trip. We only had $20,000 in shares that I sold down, and we're trying to use that to run a company. In order to make that possible, I had to go through those lonely nights, those lonely
Yes.
weekends, and give up so many things that everyone else is drinking, partying, doing drugs, going out. I didn't even look at it as giving up, but it was the norm at the time where I'm like, I don't want to do that in order to make this possible. And, that allowed these rooms to open, these doors to open, to make the changes possible. And it's not to even flex like we're successful. I still believe we're so far off the mountain of success, but the climb is now possible because we took those risks and made those changes that you may have to. And that's just something that, to clarify your point there, or sorry, expand on your point there, you may have to change those environments, those rooms, those social circles in order to make that goal possible. Whatever it is, in physique, performance, business, career, study, physique, any of it. And again, I'll ramble for the next 45 hours if you let me. Another question I want you to wrap up, and just give me a couple of quick fires that I just love to throw out
Got it.
there. One book that you think people have to read, whether it be for self-development, nutritional development, education, upskill, don't care. What is a life-changing book that you've read that you recommend people have to read right now? And we'll add it to our recommended reading list.
Man, I'm going to give one that's an educational one because everyone constantly asks me for those. And I just finished reading the third edition of the Muscle and Strength Pyramids. I think if anyone is interested in really leveling up their competence from a coaching perspective and understanding nutrition training design in a simple yet applicable manner, I got to give a hat tip to someone that I'm now blessed to call a friend. I've met him in person. I've spent time with him. Dr. Eric Helms, he did an immense job on that. I'm proud to be able to call him a friend. So that would be my answer for that one.
Amazing. And as a former bodybuilder, still physique developer and lifetime physique trainer, what is your go-to refeed, free meal, cheat meal, whatever language you want to use around it? I'm talking like that big feed where you're like, it's family time. I'm getting the cookies and the pizza, or I'm getting the donuts and the burger. What is your go-to meal that, it's straight off stage, you're feeling good, you're shredded, the season's over, and you want that big first meal? What are we hitting?
All right, so if I'm going to bring myself back to that level, that time in my life, I would tell you that it generally would be definitely burger or a very large steak. I no longer eat red meat, so that is no longer my go-to. But something that I love are chicken cutlets, and I generally it's going to be something homemade. I really like. I am someone that loves private. In like one-on-one engagement and restaurants in the States, I know you probably haven't spent too much time in restaurants in the States. They're just overly populated, packed, crowded, packed. Especially we're now in Nashville. We've relocated from the city, but still, even back there or even here, it doesn't allow myself and my partner to really engage in deep, eye contact
Mhm.
and conversation. And so I really just love our personal dinners that we have. So definitely would go with chicken cutlets. I'm not a huge food guy though, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm surprised, and I'll make this a very quick point. I find a lot of bodybuilders over time we get that way. I find now like my fiance, she get into sourdough, and when I was had like some free meals, some cheap I don't know, if it was cheap meals, like a free meal or a refeed over Christmas that my coach gave me. She did like some sourdough pizzas, and we made homemade pizzas, tracked
Yeah,
them, macro recorded. And we did them. That was our Christmas together. We got some Christmas cookies and we got some homemade sourdough pizza. So everything was like tracked and normal food that I
mhm,
eat. But it was like we did that together and that was our time. And it was
yes,
so filling and satisfying that now I think about it like I do a lot of ninja creamies in my prep. A lot of protein creamies that like I'll just add different flavors or sauces to them. It's very minimal macros. It's great. I struggle now to go back to those full serving takeout versions. I struggle to go back to like eating takeout pizza or eating takeout, a full tub of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. I struggle with that now because I enjoy the homemade versions that we make so much more that the palatability of that food, I'm like, I don't want it. And I've found as I've gotten more and more into my
100%.
preps and physique development, I'm like, I like my whole food. Everyone always gives me a bit of grief about it for like my chicken and rices and fried rices and sushis. I'm like, I like simple done well and usually at
Yes,
home or like home. And it's funny that I find so many bodybuilders get that way over time. It's like, I want the burger and donuts afterwards. Now it's like, I want some sushi and I want some like maybe some fruit and something homemade at home or some homemade cookies or some baked goods at home and I'm good. So I find that very interesting. But
100%.
to wrap it up, where does everyone find you? What's a thing? Is there anything coming out that you're releasing soon that we can pump out and share and help you with? How does everyone find you and get in contact?
First and foremost, guys, if you are interested in daily content, I would definitely recommend that you go over to Instagram and search me at Brandon Dacruz _. If you had any questions, inquiries, coaching, interests, you guys can find me at bdacruz bdacruzfitness at gmail.com. Sorry, it's late in the day for me, guys. And then in terms of podcasts, if you guys want deep dive podcasts, Ben's episode will be up soon. I've had the immense pleasure of bringing on a lot of my most respected colleagues, a lot of mentors that I've had over the years. For the last 4 years, I've really built out a very large catalog for the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. There's a ton of deep dives, whether it be solo episodes or mentors that I brought on to cover topics much better than I could myself. That has been my testament to giving back to this industry. And always, since I got into this in 2010, when this was just a PT side job, I always said I wanted to leave this industry better than I found it myself. And the number one bottleneck that I found initially when I got into fitness, and the year was 2005, was we only had forums and we didn't know who to trust. It was very hard to get information. And now, 21 years later, we're in a different sector. This is the age of or the era of information. However, it's very hard to parse through what is proper and good information from
Yes.
misinformation and disinformation. So I call this chasing clarity because I'm really trying to cut through the noise, push aside the BS, and really give you the practical guidelines, the science and evidence-based perspective, and really bridging the gap between science and practice. And that's my goal on each and every episode. And we got 200 up for you guys.
Yeah, amazing. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you jump on and we've taken up enough of your time, and I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy, your information, your brain. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence, brother. And I look forward to chatting again.
I can't wait till the next time, my friend.